All right, let's talk about hip movement. Hip movement applies to every single range that you fight in. So if I want to kick, I have to open up my hips to be able to give myself a good right tie kick so I can, slam his leg or his rib cage or his head or whatever. I have to use my hips. When I'm punching, I use my hips. There's a movement happening there. I can't just punch, right? I can't just kick. If I don't move my hips, it's impossible for me to do these movements. In terms of how it applies to the ground, it's everything in the ground. So kicking, trapping, striking, grappling, ground, each one of those ranges uses the hip. I use the hip this way. I use the hip this way. I use the hip this way as I move into the striking range. Okay, all of them. Immobilizations, if I'm doing immobilization, I have to move my hips and my legs. But in the ground, it's really, really important. Okay, so the closest proximity range is the ground, and when I'm on the ground, if I really want to progress, if I want to become competent, if I want to be able to do submissions and transitions, if I want to set up for these things, if I want to be able to move from one position to another, I have to move my hips. I have to be able to get out of the way. I have to understand things, drills like shrimping, for example. Very important, or I'm going to have a pretty crappy ground game. I'm not going to be very effective and efficient in my ground exercises and my movements at all. So when you're working with an opponent, you have to be able to work your hips. So it may seem sort of like, oh, well, I don't understand. You work with any instructor long enough, what happens? You're trying to do a position, you can't quite get it. Like, for example, let's say that you're trying to do a triangle, okay? I'll give you a great example. So I'm in the guard, and he reaches through, I see my opportunity, and I go, hey, I'm going to go into, the triangle at this point, right? So I push away, I get my diamond position to start off with, and I'm like, I'm fumbling with it, and I'm like, I can't get it, right? And I'm not quite here. And what happens? The instructor comes over and goes, okay, seriously, move your hips. So I've got to transition so that I'm in a much better position so that I can sink it, right? Because if you think about all the movements that we do, an arm bar, another good example, right? So I'm here, and I push away, and I move him here, and I push. What did I do? I moved my hips so that I went from being parallel to perpendicular, right? So I'm now 90 degrees with it. If I didn't move my hips, it's very hard for me to be able to get in the position. So when you're thinking about hip movement, you really do need to take the time to learn exercises that are going to help you become functional with your hips, or your ground game isn't going to become very good at all. It's really that important.